I'm going to talk a bit about national prosperity, and I'm going to talk about the challenge, the response and the opportunity. The first challenge we have is that projected growth may be lower over the next 40 years, and that is a direct result of the fact that we have changing demographics in Australia. It is also the case that we need to work harder at improving our productivity, issues that you'll be discussing over this conference. But roughly, they're not dissimilar in terms of potential growth and real GDP per person growth. The demographic challenge is very real, as the intergenerational report indicated. Life expectancy is increasing, so we are living longer and we're going to be wealthier. That's a terrific thing, you would think, and we should embrace that opportunity. As you can see, we are the beginning of the century, previous century, life expectancy was around 55. That's when the age pension was introduced for people turning 65. So it was almost like the perfect policy. Nobody actually got there. And of course, it remained at 65 for a very long period of time. And when compulsory superannuation was introduced by Paul Keating, 1992, life expectancy was 72. Today it's around 82. And by the middle of this century, it's getting closer to 100, particularly with medical breakthroughs. Of course, that means that more and more people are living to 100. And that's encouraging as well. It is entirely feasible that someone has been born in the world today that could live to 150, or as Time magazine had on its front cover, 148. But the fact is that with medical breakthroughs and with human organ transplants, there is nothing that is impossible. Of course, that means that there'll be fewer people of traditional working age supporting those over in the traditional retirement age. And as you can see, in the 70s, it was 7.3 people aged between 15 and 64 supporting someone over the age of 65. That is falling away, which necessarily means that we want to encourage people to continue working. As I said, one of the key assumptions is that productivity growth will continue at what has been a trend of around 1.5% over the last decade. Now, we have to earn that productivity growth, and it's vitally important that we never give up on reform. And of course, reform has no finishing line. I see Nick Greiner here, who was one of the great reforming premiers of Australia, and I was proud to be working with him on the state reform agenda at that time. And there was an underlying assumption that reform has to cover both Commonwealth and state governments as well. So the question is, how do we respond to these challenges? The first is to improve workforce participation. In this last budget, we had a jobs and small business package, which I'll come to in a moment, but we are spending $664 million on a skills fund, creating 250,000 training places and support services over the next 5 years. Importantly, $331 million on a youth employment strategy, and that provides flexibility. Hugely important, flexibility on the ground for employers, rather than Canberra dictating the strictures of the program. It is that flexibility that matters. And as we've announced in this year's budget, a $3.5 billion reform of childcare. There's over 160,000 parents in Australia that either want to work or want to work longer. Many of them don't have a choice, because it's very hard to live in the capital city on one income and pay a mortgage. So there is increasing demand for childcare. The current childcare system, as identified by the Productivity Commission, is not meeting the needs of parents. So our reform agenda, which is fully funded, on top of a significant increase in funding already, is going to help to make the childcare system more flexible and more affordable. A key part of that program, of course, is to spend more money on infrastructure, but better money on infrastructure. Last year's budget, I announced a $50 billion commitment to improving the infrastructure pie in Australia. Importantly, the asset recycling initiative is well underway. The asset recycling initiative came about because I was on the other side working for Nick Greiner of National Competition Policy and saw how you could actually engender real reform at a state level by putting money on the table as an incentive to the states. Surprise, surprise. And so we developed the Asset Recycling Initiative, which is a $5 billion fund to be an incentive payment for states that actually privatise, but reallocate the capital from that privatisation into new productive infrastructure for projects that were approved by us. Our 15% bonus helped to address the fundamental point that state-owned enterprises, when they are privatised, they become federal taxpayers, company taxpayers. So the federal government actually wins out of state privatisations to some degree. So over the medium term, it is a cost-neutral program for us, but it brings forward a huge amount of infrastructure and compensates the states for the immediate loss of revenue. It has been transformative in New South Wales. We signed the deal with Mike Baird to appropriate $2 billion, and that made the difference on a cost-benefit analysis of selling or not selling electricity. It didn't go too well for the Queensland government, but in Victoria, the new state Labor government is going to avail itself of the asset recycling program, and South Australia has already written to us with a number of initiatives. Western Australia is going to participate in the program, and the Northern Territory is as well. Queensland has decided not to, and we have reappropriated $800 million from the asset recycling program to the Northern Australia white paper, which was announced by the Prime Minister last Friday. So we are actively out there, and there will be more announcements in the not-too-distant future. As I said, that $5 billion Northern Australia infrastructure facility is a starting point. We did a deal with New South Wales on the second stage of WestConnex to provide them with a concessional loan to make sure that WestConnex came to fruition. Stage 2, which meant with one being committed to, with $1.5 billion of Commonwealth money, Stage 2 being committed to with a $2 billion concessional loan from the Commonwealth Government. Stage 3 became viable. So we're accelerating a massive project in the middle of Sydney as a result of the partnership with the states. The $5 billion infrastructure facility in Northern Australia, which will go through the state governments, is open to any private sector operator that is prepared to build the ports, the roads, the railways, any infrastructure that helps to grow the Great North. And just for edification, Western Sydney Airport is happening. Legislation went through the House of Representatives in a bipartisan fashion last week. So it's actually happening. Hooray! 50 years. So that's all it's taken, but it's happening. And I'm sorry you can't see the details of that, but basically what that illustrates is that the NBN is in play. We're actually delivering that together with a whole lot of infrastructure initiatives that ensure that we are getting on with road networks all around the country. And that is hugely important as a response to some of the demands to improve productivity. Last year, we also announced an innovation and competitiveness agenda. We're spending around $9 billion on research and innovation each and every year. We are reformatting the employee share scheme arrangements so that employees actually don't have to pay tax until they've realised the benefits of owning those shares. Would seem to be common sense, but it was removed by the previous Labor government and basically closed down the employee share scheme incentive program. This was mentioned to me by a number of startups as one of the key impediments to getting startups going in Australia, and one of the reasons why a number of them were moving to Silicon Valley. So we've responded, and the new scheme starts soon, as does removing obstacles in relation to crowdsourced funding, and that's bipartisan. We've got bipartisan agreement there, which means we're not going to go as far as New Zealand, but we're going quite some way in ensuring that businesses can get that working capital that is so necessary. And of course, we've also announced in the budget a range of different measures, such as a $20,000 instant asset write-off, but also we've made it deductible for startups starting up their own business. That's the response. Entrepreneurship. I want to talk a little bit about this company because it made me look rather foolish, and I've learnt the lesson. This is a company called 3P Learning. This is their website. It's called Mathletics. If anyone has young children, they'd be familiar with Mathletics. So as I've said on numerous occasions, my 5-year-old taught me about Mathletics. He started doing it at 5 o'clock in the morning, was given a password and a login by his school teacher, and he started competing with kids around the world. And as you can see, on that front of the site, you've got Wellington, New Zealand leading the world, and then Brits, and if you go on it any day, you can see kids from Egypt or all countries around the world. And I was praising this company and saying, what a great idea if only we had it in Australia to these startups. And the guy sitting next to me said, actually, I did start it up. And we've got an office 150 metres from your office in North Sydney. And we have 4.5 million children around the world using this. And we've gone into another site as well for spelling. And this is a great Australian story. It's listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, has over 400 employees. And these are the things we can do because the world has changed. The world has changed. And that's one of the reasons why in the budget we had a $5.5 billion jobs and small business program. Of course, we've got the tax cut that we promised for up to 780,000 incorporated small businesses, but the 5% discount for 2/3 of small businesses that are actually not incorporated, hugely important that you have tax neutrality in that regard, and the instant asset write-off. We've had dedicated sitting days of Parliament to abolish 50,000 pages of legislation, and we've done a lot of work through the ATO and ASIC in streamlining business registrations. Which brings me to the opportunity, and I must say, my favourite slide. The Asia opportunity. As you can see, inside that circle, there are more people living inside that circle than outside of it. It's a great slide. It represents Australia's future opportunity. The world is now divided in 3 time zones, as if we didn't need to remind ourselves. The Asian time zone, the European time zone, and the American time zone. The Asian time zone is going to see not only the greatest lift in prosperity in the history of humanity of the most number of people, but importantly, Australia has the capacity to deliver what the people inside that circle are going to want. It is a phenomenal period to be alive, and it is a phenomenal opportunity for Australia. Nothing illustrates it better than the emergence of the Asian middle class. That first graph goes back to 2009. And as you can see, on the left-hand side is North America in the middle, and the light blue is Europe, and the green is the Asian middle class. In 2009, the middle class of North America and Europe were probably twice the size of Asia. In 2020, just 5 years' time, Asia will be larger than North America and Europe combined. In 15 years' time, Asia will be at least 2.5 times, maybe 3 times, what North America and Europe are combined. In fact, the Indian middle class will be larger than North America and Europe combined. Now, what does this mean? Well, it is simply illustrative of the fact that you are seeing the emergence of a consumer class. Now, you've got the United States, near full employment now. You're going to start to see, sooner or later, some good wage growth in the United States, which empowers that middle class that has driven so much of the consumption in the world economy over the last few years. Europe, thankfully, has avoided recession, and I believe will continue to do so. But the fact is, this emerging Asian middle class, they're looking for consumable goods, they're looking for all the things that Australia is very good at providing. They're looking for better education. They're looking for tourism experiences. They're looking for quality agriculture and food. And they're looking for clean air. They're looking for all the things that Australia can provide. Architectural services, accounting services. Think about China alone with its demographic bubble, the biggest in the history of humanity. As a result of the one-child policy, as people age, they're looking for financial advice, financial security. Australia has a financial services industry around 10% of GDP, roughly the same size as our resources sector, but a very small exporter. Services, in fact, represent just 17% of our exports, but 70% of our economy. And as you can see, there is a massive opportunity for us, the blue being services, the green being agriculture, manufacturing and mining. You can see that 70% of the economy that is services is only 17% of exports. And this is why we've been driving the free trade agreements. This is why we've been driving the free trade agreements. Overwhelmingly services-based agreements, giving us unparalleled access to the aged care sector in China, giving us unparalleled access in a range of different areas across the services sector in China, Korea and Japan. And last week when we signed the free trade agreement with China, it was a landmark moment of opportunity for the services industry in Australia. There's no doubt about that. And we are working through the night, working on the agreement with India, putting pressure on them to help us to get us to the point where we can have a similar, very positive agreement with India. Of course, agriculture and mining and manufacturing are going to continue to represent the overwhelming majority of our exports into the future. But the great opportunity is in relation to services. And of course, you can start to see it just on the demographics in the Asian region. China is ageing and it needs a whole range of different services. Health services, aged care services, financial services. And as you can see, China's demographic is heading down in age, but India's demographic, very young, and they're looking for job opportunities. Anything we can do to help to build the infrastructure of India, and should we join the AIIB, and should we further participate in bilats with India, anything we can do to build the infrastructure of for India is going to be of enormous assistance to our base exporters in minerals and resources and agriculture, and to a lesser degree in manufacturing. But China is going to have a different demand, and that's how we respond. And as I said, the China Free Trade Agreement, it is their best ever, as the Chinese Minister for Trade said last week, it is their most generous trade agreement with anyone. It's guaranteed access for law and telco firms in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, 77 additional Australian education providers listed on the Department of Education website in China. Health and aged care providers will be able to operate without regulation in many cases, aged care providers, and of course there is greater access for our financial services providers. This is our opportunity and we're not going to let it pass. And that's exactly what the government is focused on, how we can have measured reform within Australia, ensure that we are preparing for some of the challenges that face us domestically, but at the same time open the door for future opportunities, many of which will come a lot faster than many Australians anticipate. So thank you very much, and over to you, Stephen, for questions.